Today I'm going to show you how I made this pleated short sleeve shirt from scratch with no pattern needed. The fabric I have used is a really lightweight cotton and I needed about 1.5 meters of it. The amount of fabric you will need is going to depend on your body size and shape, but I recommend having about 2 meters on hand. What you will need for this project: you'll need a sewing machine, scissors, a t-shirt, fabric pen, ruler, measuring tape, sewing clips or pins, an iron, interfacing for the buttonholes, and buttons. We are going to add the pleats straight onto the fabric, so spread out one layer of fabric. The fabric's right side should be facing you. To make the pleats, you'll need to decide how wide you want your pleats to be and how many you want. Mark evenly spaced points along a straight line, about ½ inch apart, or whatever spacing you prefer. Then take one point, skip a point, and connect to the next. So basically, 1 will connect to 3, 4 to 6, and so on. Reflect the same points on the other end. Your pleats should be as long as the shirt you're about to use. I'm making 4 pleats on each side of the front panels. Keep doing this until you're satisfied with the number of pleats. Also make sure to press the folds so they stay in place. The piece we are going to create first is the left front panel piece. Grab a t-shirt that you like the fit of. I recommend not using a very tight t-shirt. Fold the t-shirt in half and clip it so it doesn't move. Now place it over the pleats. It's up to you where you want them to appear on the shirt. I recommend somewhere in the middle and not on the very sides. Once you're happy with the placement, use a fabric pen to trace around the t-shirt, making sure to hide the sleeves. And that as you're doing this, you're also adding in about ½ inch of seam allowance. It really doesn't have to be perfect, the shirt is loose fitting, just remember that. Then cut your fabric out. Now let's create the right front panel piece. Repeat the same steps as you did with the left, but make sure your pleats are folded in the opposite direction this time. Once you're happy with the pleats, take the left front panel piece, flip it over, and place it so the pleats line up exactly. Cut around, but before you do, add in an extra ½ inch on the center front edge. That's where your buttonholes will go. We're also going to make binding strips for each front piece to be placed on the center front where your buttons and buttonholes will go. This will also be a cleaner way to finish up the raw edges. These pieces should be 1½ inches wide and match the whole length of your front pieces. Once we have these 2 binding pieces cut out, with the fabric wrong sides facing you, fold in each edge into the center, then fold in again. Make sure you're pressing as you fold. Set these pieces aside for now. Take the right front panel piece and some interfacing, Cut out a piece of interfacing that is 1/2 inch wide and as long as the center front of that panel piece. Fuse it in place. This will help you make those buttonholes later. For the back piece, fold your fabric in half. Wrong sides of fabric should be facing each other. And use the right front panel piece, the one with the extra 1/2 inch at the front. Place it on the folded edge. Before you cut around, the back neckline should come up about 1.5 inches higher than the front. So make sure you mark this, then cut to that new point. We will create a single pleat at the back with that extra 1 inch we added in before. Just mark the middle and create a 1/2 inch pleat the same way we did to the front pleats. Before we assemble the main panels, we're going to sew the pleats in place. Grab your back piece first. Top stitch about 1.5 inches down on the folded edge of that pleat. For the front pieces, from the very top stitch down about 3 inches. Then use this as a guide to match the rest. It's totally up to you how far up and down you want to go. We're also going to do a very simple top stitch in place for the bottom pleats, just so they don't move around as we're working with them. Assembling the shirt, we're going to do a French seam along the sides and shoulders. Start by placing your back piece wrong side facing you, then place the front side pieces right sides facing you and align them with the edges of the back piece, so the fabric is facing the wrong sides together. Sew a narrow seam along the sides and shoulders. Then flip everything so the right sides of the fabric are facing each other. And sew again with about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of seam allowance. So now the raw edges are hidden. Grab your center front binding strips, open the folds, take the raw edge of the binding and align it to the raw edge of the center front where the interfacing is. The fabrics should be right sides facing each other. Clip it in place and sew along that first folded line closest to the edge. Do the same for the other binding piece. Trim any excess fabric, but don't cut the interfacing. Now fold the binding over the raw edge to the wrong side of the fabric. Clip it in place for now. Do the same for the other binding piece. We're going to cut out some bias binding for the neckline. Measure your neckline and add about 2 inches to the measurement. Make the bias binding about 1.5 inches wide. We're basically going to do the exact steps we made to create the center front bindings. The only difference is that this binding will be cut at a 45-degree angle, so it has a natural stretch. And exactly how we attach the binding pieces to the center front we're going to do to the neckline, but be sure to leave about 1 inch of extra binding at each end because we're going to fold these in. Once you have folded the bias binding over the raw edge, we're going to do a stitch in place. With the extra binding at the ends, double fold it towards the wrong sides of the fabric at the back. You want the folded edge to align with the binding edge of the center front. Then, sew down the end of the bias binding at the top, as well as along the center front binding. Repeat this on both sides. For the sleeves, fold your fabric, grab the front panel and place it on an angle along the folded edge. The front neckline should be about 2 inches down from the fold. Then measure 4 inches along the fold and 4.5 inches along the armhole. Connect these 2 points to form a nice curved edge. Cut out 4 pieces. Pair up 2 sleeve pieces with the right sides of fabric facing each other and sew along the less curved edge, about 1/2 inch. This will be the bottom of the sleeve. Once you've done this, we're going to cut off that excess seam allowance and flip it over. We're going to create another stitch along that curve again. This is going to be the bottom of your sleeve. We're now going to attach one of the sleeves to the shoulder. Fold the sleeve in half, then attach that middle point to the shoulder seam. Once the middle part is clipped in, then you can start to clip all the other parts together. We're going to sew along that curve. We're now going to do a zigzag stitch along that inner sleeve. We'll be doing a bias binding along that exposed armhole at the bottom. We'll be following the same steps as we did earlier for the neckline binding. We also want the bias binding to extend further up the armhole just so we can hide it neatly inside. Once you have it, We're going to unfold it, align the raw edge of the bias binding to the raw edge of the armhole, make sure the fabrics are right size facing, and then create a stitch. Once we've created that stitch, we're going to fold over the bias binding inside the armhole and create a second stitch, just like we did with the neckline. Unlike the neckline though, we're now going to do an extra step, which is fold in the bias binding into the wrong sides of the armhole. And we're just going to stitch along the edges of that bias binding again. Now let's hem the bottom. Fold the fabric in by 1/4 or 1/2 inch. Press it, fold it in to hide the raw edges, and sew along the edge. Last step is adding the buttons. Decide how many buttons you want and how far apart you want them. I added 6 buttons and they're about 2.5 inches apart. Once you're happy, use the side where you added the interfacing to add the buttonholes and sew the buttons in place. And you're done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.